My father stood on the cabin porch with my old brass key balanced across his palm and said, in front of 20 relatives, "Grandpa is gone, Emily. Whatever claim you thought you had died with him." I was 39 years old, standing in cold October rain at Pineglass Lake, and for a second I felt 12 again. Behind him, the cabin windows glowed yellow. My mother, Diane, kept rearranging paper cups on a folding table so she would not have to look at me. My younger sister, Melissa, held up her phone, pretending to record the lake while keeping me in the frame. Her husband, Tyler, carried glossy furniture catalogs through the open door. Beside the porch sat a taped cardboard box containing my childhood books, framed photographs, and the blue quilt my grandmother June had sewn for me. Above it, someone had taped a printed sign to the railing: "Carter family only." My key no longer fit. A black keypad had been drilled into the door. Dad closed his fingers around the brass key. "Melissa will be managing the place now. She and Tyler have plans that actually make financial sense." I did not cry. I took out my phone and photographed the keypad, the sign, and the box. Then I asked, "Have you already listed the cabin as part of Grandpa's probate estate?" Dad laughed. "The paperwork is handled." That answer told me more than he understood. Because 2 years earlier, Grandpa Walter had taken me into attorney Nora Blake's office and signed documents my parents had never bothered to ask about. And after his funeral, Nora had mentioned one sealed envelope that could only be opened if the family challenged his wishes. Even I did not know exactly what was inside it. Before I tell you what happened when that envelope finally reached a probate judge, tell me in the comments whether you would have walked away from that porch or demanded answers immediately. And subscribe if you believe quiet people are often keeping the strongest evidence. To understand why my parents believed they could erase me so easily, you need to understand the roles in our family. My father, Richard Carter, was Grandpa Walter's only son. At 64, he was a retired regional sales manager who still spoke as though every room were one of his Monday meetings. He did not ask what people wanted, he announced what had been decided. My mother was different. Diane was polished, gracious, and careful in public. She disliked open conflict, but she had a talent for turning Dad's choices into something she called what the family agreed. Then there was Melissa. She was 5 years younger than me, married, nearby, photogenic, and skilled at making our parents feel admired. Melissa remembered birthdays with elaborate posts. I remembered prescription refills, leaking pipes, and which contractor would answer during a snowstorm. She was the daughter they displayed. I was the daughter they called when something broke. The cabin had been built by Grandpa and Grandma June in 1978, on a narrow piece of land where pine trees leaned toward the lake. Some of my earliest memories were there, sanding window frames beside Grandpa, learning to repair screens, and stirring soup on the old cast-iron stove while Grandma hummed. After she died, the cabin became Grandpa's refuge. It became mine too. Dad saw property value. Melissa saw photographs. I saw the last place in our family where love had once felt uncomplicated. But money had changed the way they looked at it. Dad had lost more than he admitted in a condo investment. Mom had quietly refinanced their house. Melissa and Tyler believed seasonal rentals could solve everyone's problems. They also believed an old will left everything to Dad. And they believed my divorce, my distance from home, and my silence meant I had no power. What they never understood was that my silence had never meant I was unaware. It meant I had spent years watching exactly how our family worked. And the pattern had started long before they changed that lock. The pattern had begun long before they changed that lock. When I was 16, Dad would drive us to Pineglass on Friday evenings and announce that everyone deserved a relaxing weekend. What he meant was that Melissa deserved one. She changed into a swimsuit and headed for the dock while I stayed inside with Grandma June, wiping shelves, shaking out blankets, and cleaning the pantry. "Emily is better at practical things," Mom would say, as if that were praise. At dinner, Dad told relatives how Melissa had brought life back to the cabin. No one mentioned who had cleaned the kitchen, repaired the screen, or carried in the groceries. That became my role. Useful in private, invisible in public. Years later, when my marriage ended, Mom treated the divorce as evidence that something in me had always been difficult. She called Aunt Ruth before I had told the rest of the family. Don't take sides, she warned them. Emily is very emotional right now. I was not emotional. I was embarrassed that my mother had turned the worst month of my life into a warning label. At Christmas, I still arrived early to cook and stayed late to wash dishes. Melissa received Grandma's pearl earrings because, Mom said, she has more occasions to wear them. I received storage containers. By then, Grandpa was slowing down. His knees hurt, his eyesight was fading, and winter at the lake had become harder. Dad called one November evening. "You're the organized one. Check on him once a month." Once a month became twice. I picked up prescriptions, scheduled furnace inspections, met plumbers, and sat with Grandpa while the lake froze beyond the windows. Dad thanked me privately, then complained that I was getting too involved whenever Grandpa asked my opinion. Melissa used the cabin for social media weekends. She left wet towels on beds, and once cracked a porch board dragging a metal fire pit across it. When I photographed the damage, she texted, "You act like you own the place." I paid for part of the leaking roof and replaced the unsafe porch steps through my company account. At Thanksgiving, Dad waved away the subject. "It's her little design business," he told Tyler. "She likes projects." Northline preservation was not little. My firm restored historic inns, municipal buildings, and private estates across 3 states. I managed grant compliance, construction budgets, and title research. My parents did not know it had become a stable 6-figure business, not because I hid it, but because they had stopped listening. My work taught me to photograph everything, save every invoice, and never assume sentiment-protected property. Grandpa noticed. He began asking me to keep duplicate receipts for cabin repairs, before and after photographs, contractor names, and copies of family messages about selling. I thought he was becoming cautious with age. One snowy evening, while I stacked firewood beside the stove, he asked, "If this place ever needed protecting from family, would you still protect it?" I turned toward him. "From family?" He stared into his coffee. Sometimes people love what something can give them more than they love what it means. 2 months later, he asked me to review the cabin's costs and options for keeping it from being forced into a sale after his death. I told him I could explain the property issues, but I would not prepare legal papers. I wanted no one to claim I had influenced him, so I drove him to Nora Blake, an estate attorney in the county seat. Over several meetings, Grandpa created the Walter Carter Family Cabin Trust. He transferred the cabin into it, through a recorded deed, and named himself the first trustee. I was named successor trustee because I understood preservation and had never tried to profit from the property. The trust protected Aunt Ruth's right to visit and required major structural changes to follow preservation standards. Grandpa instructed Nora to keep the original documents. "Don't discuss this with your father," he told me afterward. "I want to see whether he respects my wishes before he knows he has to." That sentence hurt. Grandpa was preparing for betrayal, while still hoping his son would choose differently. I kept invoices and meeting dates. Nora kept the originals. My family had underestimated my career, which meant they also underestimated my ability to hire counsel, read a title record, and wait for facts instead of approval. 3 days after the lockout, Nora called. "Emily, your father has filed a probate petition listing the cabin as part of Walter's estate." I closed my office door. "There's more," she said. "He is claiming your grandfather lacked capacity when the later documents were signed." That was when I understood. The lock was only the beginning. Nora Blake did not sound surprised when she told me what my father had filed. That frightened me more than the petition itself. Her office sat above a pharmacy in an old brick building across from the county courthouse. Grandpa had trusted her for nearly 20 years. She was 61, silver-haired, soft-spoken, and impossible to rush. When I sat across from her, she did not begin with the deed. She asked, "What hurt most?" I looked at the brass key in my hand. "Not the lock," I said. "The box." They packed my childhood like it was clutter. For years, people had praised me for handling things well. Nora was the first person to ask what handling them had cost me. Then she opened a gray legal folder. The recorded deed gives us a strong position, she said, but your father is alleging undue influence and challenging Walter's capacity. No private confrontations. Preserve every message and let the record speak. Nora placed a photocopy of Grandpa's handwritten instruction before me. He had left a sealed contingency envelope in her fireproof vault, signed across the flap and witnessed by 2 people. It could be opened in court only if Richard disputed the transfer or accused me of manipulation. What's inside? I know there is an original instrument and a personal statement, she said. Walter added other materials later. I have not opened it. Hope rose, then stopped. A letter could explain his feelings, but it could not replace valid documents. We are not building a case around a mystery, Nora said. We are building it around records. She helped me file an objection, seek a temporary order preventing any sale or rental, and demand an inventory of everything removed from the cabin. Before I left, she turned her laptop toward me. Dad's sworn statement said I had rarely visited Grandpa and contributed nothing meaningful to the property. I read it twice. My father had not simply excluded me. He had rewritten my relationship with Grandpa under oath. Over the next several weeks, Nora and I built the record one ordinary piece at a time. There were invoices for the roof, plumbing, and porch steps. My calendar showed 47 trips to Pineglass in 3 years, grocery receipts, pharmacy pickups, fuel charges, and dated photographs placed me beside Grandpa during months Dad claimed I was absent. Evelyn Shaw, Grandpa's neighbor, provided a statement describing him as alert, stubborn, and fully aware of his finances. She remembered him saying Richard wanted to sell before the old man became a problem. Meanwhile, Melissa posted photographs captioned, "A new chapter at Pineglass." In one, Grandma June's quilt covered the couch. In another, Tyler stood beside a mood board labeled Lakeside Luxury. 2 days later, I found a draft rental listing promising renovated interiors, premium lake access, and summer bookings. I took screenshots before it disappeared. The judge issued a temporary preservation order. No sale, no rental, no renovation, no further removal of personal property before the hearing. Dad responded with a family-wide email accusing me of freezing an asset that should benefit everyone. Mom called relatives and said I was using legal technicalities to steal from my grieving father. Then Aunt Ruth told me Grandpa's tool chest, several quilts, and 2 old photo albums were no longer inside the cabin. I sat at my kitchen table that night with my laptop open and drafted a long response. I listed every visit, every repair, every appointment, and every lie. I imagined sending it to the entire family and watching the story collapse. Then I deleted it. That was the old trap. They created a false version of me, then made me exhaust myself proving I was not that woman. Nora advised me to document the missing items for the court-ordered accounting and say nothing else. Following that advice felt unnatural. Silence had once been how I survived my family. Now it was becoming a boundary they could not control. 3 nights before the hearing, Melissa texted me. "You can win paperwork and still lose the whole family." I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Then I replied, "I am no longer willing to lose myself to keep it." She did not answer. The next morning, Nora called. The contested hearing had been scheduled, and the judge had agreed to consider the sealed envelope procedure if the evidence justified it. Every version of our family was about to enter the same courtroom, and this time, the record would be listening. The Memorial Weekend had been described in the family group chat as a quiet gathering to honor Grandpa. That was why I arrived carrying a covered dish, a framed photograph of him and Grandma June, and the brass key he had given me when I was 21. I believed the court hearing would be the real confrontation. I was wrong. The first confrontation was waiting on the porch. Dad stood beneath the cabin's weathered green awning, while cousins, neighbors, and family friends crowded the yard with paper plates and coffee cups. Melissa had arranged photographs of Grandpa along the railing. Tyler had set up his phone on a small tripod near the steps. Mom moved between guests wearing Grandma's pearl necklace and a careful smile. Then Dad tapped a spoon against his cup. "We need to talk about the future of Pineglass," he announced. The conversation stopped. He spoke about responsibility, rising costs, and preserving the cabin for generations. Then he placed one hand on Melissa's shoulder. Melissa and Tyler have agreed to take over management. They'll modernize the property and create enough rental income to keep it in the family. Mom passed around renovation boards showing white cabinets, black fixtures, and a glass wall where Grandpa's bookcase had always stood. I looked at her. Why wasn't this discussed with me? Dad's smile tightened. You moved away, Emily. You built your own life. You don't get to disappear and expect an equal voice. I drove here 47 times in 3 years. Melissa laughed softly. Grandpa needed cheerful company, not spreadsheets and inspection reports. A few people looked down at their plates. They had wrapped exclusion in concern and greed in the language of preservation. Dad entered a code on the new keypad. That was when I saw my box. My books. Childhood photographs. A ceramic bird Grandma helped me paint. The blue quilt that had always rested on the upstairs bed. Dad held out my brass key. We changed the locks, he said. Take what belongs to you and leave what belongs to the family. For 1 second, I heard only rain ticking against the gutter. Then I noticed Tyler's phone. He was recording me. They expected tears or shouting. They wanted proof that I was unstable, selfish, and exactly the woman Dad had described in his petition. I took the key. Where are Grandpa's records and tools? Everything has been handled, Dad replied too quickly. I photographed the keypad, the box, the sign, and Tyler's tripod. I won't force entry, I said, and I won't argue about ownership in a yard full of people. That will be decided properly. Dad's face changed. Calm had not been part of his plan. As I carried the box toward my car, Aunt Ruth followed. She pulled out the blue quilt, folded it over my arms, and whispered, Walter told me this place might need one honest witness. I stopped. What did he mean? Her eyes moved toward the porch. I think it has something to do with the envelope. 2 days later, Aunt Ruth sat beside me in Nora's office, her hands around untouched coffee. 6 months before Grandpa died, she had witnessed a sealed packet. She watched him place inside a signed letter from his doctor, a digital memory card, and a folded document bearing the county recorder's stamp. He said it was only to be used if Richard denied what he had done, Ruth told us. Then she revealed why Grandpa had become cautious. After Dad's condo investment failed, he brought a realtor's listing agreement to the cabin and pressured Grandpa to sign. Grandpa refused. Soon afterward, he removed Dad's access to one of his financial accounts. Nora checked the title record again. The deed had entered the trust 18 months before Grandpa's death, long before the medical decline Dad was using to challenge his capacity. The timing helps, she said, but the judge will examine everything. That evening, I searched my archived emails. Buried inside an old thread was a message Dad had sent months after the trust was created. Talk Dad into selling. He listens to you. We can divide the money later. I read it 3 times. In his probate filing, Dad claimed he had never known Grandpa intended to keep the cabin from the estate. His own email showed he knew Grandpa was resisting a sale. I forwarded it to Nora with the repair ledger, rental listing screenshots, and lockout photographs. I did not post them online or send them to relatives. I was finished trying to win a public vote on my character. Submit everything, I told Nora. And request an accounting of whatever they removed. She studied me. Are you certain? Yes. I'm not asking the hearing to make them love me. I'm asking the court to protect what Grandpa chose. Nora placed Walter's packet inside a court evidence envelope and sealed it. The judge has agreed to examine it at the hearing, she said. For the first time since the lockout, I felt no urge to explain myself. I had the record. I had a witness. And soon, my father would have to repeat his story in a room where silence could not be mistaken for surrender. The county probate courtroom was smaller than I expected. No towering columns, no dramatic gallery, just pale walls, fluorescent lights, 2 wooden tables, and a judge who looked tired of people confusing family history with legal fact. Dad sat across the aisle in a navy suit. Mom wore Grandma June's pearls. Melissa sat beside Tyler with both hands folded over her phone. Behind them were relatives Dad had invited after telling them I was trying to seize his inheritance. Nora placed 3 folders in front of us. Do not look at them, she whispered. Look at the judge. Dad's attorney described the cabin as Walter Carter's principal family asset. He argued that it belonged in probate, and that the later trust documents resulted from my influence over an aging man. Then Dad testified. My daughter Emily lived in Minneapolis, he said. She visited occasionally. After property values rose, she became unusually interested in the cabin. The words were polished, almost reasonable. That was what made them cruel. Nora began with the certified deed transferring Pineglass Cabin into the Walter Carter Family Cabin Trust 18 months before Grandpa died. She presented the trust certificate, attorney meeting notes, and dates of Grandpa's independent consultations. The cabin was not owned by Walter individually at death, she said. It was not a probate asset. Dad's attorney shifted to incapacity. Nora answered with medical records, repair invoices, grocery receipts, and my calendar showing 47 visits. Then she displayed Dad's email on the courtroom monitor. Talk Dad into selling. He listens to you. We can divide the money later. The room changed. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Carter, when did you first learn your father did not want to sell? That email is being taken out of context, Dad said. It appears to be the context, the judge replied. Nora requested permission to present Walter's sealed contingency packet. The clerk carried it to the bench. The judge checked the signatures across the flap and opened the envelope. No one moved. Inside was the original trust amendment, naming me successor trustee, a certified deed copy, and a physician's letter confirming that Grandpa understood his property, family relationships, and legal choices when he signed. The judge also removed a memory card. A monitor flickered on. Grandpa appeared beside Nora's bookcase, wearing the green flannel shirt he used on winter mornings. His voice was slower than I remembered, but clear. Emily did not ask me for Pineglass, he said. She asked me to see a lawyer, so no one could say she wrote my wishes for me. Mom covered her mouth. Richard believes the cabin should solve his financial problems. Melissa sees what it could earn. Emily sees what it has already held. She paid for repairs, brought my medicine, and never asked what she would receive. Dad stared at the table. If this recording is being played, then my son denied what I told him. That is why I left proof instead of another argument. The screen went dark. Dad finally said, "He was punishing me." The judge looked at him. A parent's disappointment is not evidence of incapacity. She ruled that the cabin belonged to the trust, recognized me as successor trustee, excluded Pineglass from probate, and ordered an accounting and lawful turnover of all keys, codes, and records. Dad turned toward me. "So that's it? You're going to lock your own parents out?" "I did not bring my family to court over a cabin," I said. "I came because you used grief as permission to erase Grandpa's choice and my place in his life." I picked up the old brass key. Access is not something you can demand after proving you do not respect ownership, boundaries, or truth. I did not raise my voice. The truth had already spoken for me. The consequences came slowly. Dad surrendered the keypad code, spare keys, maintenance records, and an inventory of property removed after Grandpa's death. It showed Melissa had taken quilts, photographs, and decorative pieces to stage the rental listing. Tyler had already paid a photographer and contacted a realtor. Most items were returned. Grandpa's tool chest came back damaged. An antique lantern was missing. Nora handled both through the court-ordered accounting. The realtor withdrew. The rental plan collapsed. Nora negotiated reimbursement for the changed locks, unauthorized removal, damaged property, and part of my legal expenses. But the deeper loss for my parents was control of the story. Relatives saw the visit logs, invoices, and Dad's email. At a family lunch, Aunt Ruth corrected him when he called the ruling a technicality. "Emily was present," she said. "The rest of you were just louder." I sent one factual update to the family and refused further debate. Melissa began blaming Mom and Dad for promising authority they never possessed. Tyler wanted repayment for the photographer. Dad's plan to use the cabin to repair his investment losses vanished. 3 weeks later, while I was reviewing drawings in my Minneapolis office, the receptionist called. "There's a woman here asking for you." Mom stood in the lobby holding Grandma June's blue quilt. Her eyes were swollen, but her posture was careful. "Please," she said. "Give me 5 minutes as your mother." I looked at the quilt, then at her, and I wondered whether she had come to apologize or simply to ask for the cabin another way. Mom followed me into the conference room and placed Grandma June's quilt on the table. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your father was under pressure. We were grieving." Then she added, "Our anniversary is next month. People will notice if we aren't allowed at Pineglass." There it was. The apology. The explanation. The request. "You can be my mother without having access to the cabin," I said. "Family shouldn't need permission. Family also shouldn't change locks, remove belongings, and lie under oath." I told her no one would use Pineglass until the accounting was complete. Future contact had to be about our relationship, not the property. Dad accused me of choosing Grandpa's money over blood. Melissa admitted the rental plan had moved too quickly, but insisted the cabin should remain open to everyone. I sent one reply, copied to Nora. The trust allowed invited family use. It did not create entitlement. Reconciliation required accountability, without excuses or requests attached. Aunt Ruth warned me that peace could feel lonely when chaos had always been called closeness. I still wondered whether a better daughter would have forgiven them faster, but I had spent my life measuring goodness by how much discomfort I could absorb. I was finished using pain as proof of love. When I returned to Pineglass alone, I entered the new code and paused at the door. The porch carried the memory of that cardboard box, and Dad telling me to leave what belonged to the family. Then I went inside. Through winter, I cataloged Grandpa and Grandma June's belongings, kept the worn floors, restored the porch, and placed my old brass key in a shadow box beside a photograph of Grandpa teaching me to plane a board. Northline Preservation completed its largest historic inn project that spring. I did not use the success to prove my parents had underestimated me. My worth was no longer a case I needed to argue. I invited Nora, Aunt Ruth, Evelyn, 2 close friends, and the cousins who treated me fairly, to a memorial supper. We cooked Grandpa's stew and told stories that did not turn him into property. Later, I read the personal letter he had left me. "Pineglass was not a prize," he wrote. "If preserving it ever cost me my peace, I had permission to let it go." That permission meant more than ownership. Months later, Dad apologized for the lockout and his false statements without asking for anything. I acknowledged it but made no promise. Melissa quietly returned Grandma's missing photo album. Healing did not mean pretending none of it happened. It meant I stopped asking people who excluded me to confirm that I belonged. If this story reminded you of a boundary you had to set, share your experience in the comments and subscribe for more stories about choosing dignity without losing compassion. Grandpa's envelope did not give me a family. It gave me proof, and proof gave me the courage to preserve what was loving and leave everything else outside the door.